Good Saturday afternoon, everybody. This is Congressman Mike Levin. I'm grateful that you're here for another virtual town hall, and I am super excited this week because we have a great friend, our Congress member in the adjacent district who is doing such an extraordinary job in Congress. Representative Katie Porter is here as well. Katie, it is fantastic to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm so excited we made this work.
Well, me too. I know we've been wanting to do this for some time, and we'd hope to do it in person, but this will have to do for now, and we'll do it in person one of these days. And for our viewers that tune into these virtual town halls, I again want to thank our teams who put this together, both of our campaign teams, and Jeremy for his great work on the video conferencing. I also have to pass along a special hello from my family, Chrissy, Jonathan, and Elizabeth. They want to say hi to Luke, Paul, and Betsy. They miss their friends, and hopefully when this pandemic is behind us, we can all get together again in person. And I just want to again say what an honor it is to get to serve with Katie. She has been such a tireless advocate in Congress, really holding people accountable in an amazing way, speaking truth to power, and making a huge impact in her first term. It was incredible to get to run at the same time as Katie and really see her in action from the beginning on her campaign. And I can't wait for what the future will hold. Of course, we have an election in 80 days. We can't forget about that. I wanted to just mention that we were hoping for the last several months to focus on climate change. And specifically, as many of you know, Speaker Pelosi at the beginning of the 116th Congress created the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. It's actually the second iteration of that Select Committee. The first one was back when she was last Speaker in the late 2000s. And the idea behind this committee was to take all the best ideas from throughout the Congress and the committees of jurisdiction and put it all together in one comprehensive report. And that is what we have done. It's a 538-page report that you can see at climatecrisis.house.gov. And I hope you check it out. And if you don't have time to read all 538 pages, there is a great summary as well. But this really was quite an undertaking, over 1,000 stakeholder meetings, and we're very proud of the work product, and we'll be reviewing it throughout the course of the town hall this afternoon. But before we do that, I want to hear from Katie. It is fantastic to have you with us.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. I've been very excited about this. This idea was actually hatched back in, I think, February or the first week of March, when Betsy and Elizabeth were celebrating Elizabeth's birthday party. And even though we were there to have a celebration, I managed to corral Mike into talking about work for a few minutes and made clear what a wonderful partner he has been since we have gotten to Congress, and how much I admire his incredible leadership on environmental issues. And when Mike and I were first elected, we got to know each other really well on the campaign trail, and we made a little bit of a pact. I wouldn't do anything about environment without talking to Mike. Mike wasn't going to do anything about consumer protection without talking to me. And it's been a really wonderful partnership and, dare I say, friendship. So I just feel so fortunate that we have this work that we were doing together. Today we're going to be talking about the environment, but Mike and I have also been working together on COVID-related issues, including the Orange County Healthcare Agency, trying to understand testing gaps in Orange County. Whatever the issue is, Mike is a terrific partner. So everyone in the 49th District, you're so lucky to have Mike, and I feel really lucky to be in conversation with you today.
Well, I feel exactly the same way about all the residents of the 45th. They are incredibly lucky to have you as their representative, Katie. And let's get right to it. We have quite a bit to talk about, and we also have your questions as well. We got a ton of great questions, particularly from our students, both in the 45th and in the 49th. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. But we wanted to talk about this report, Solving the Climate Crisis. And for those that have heard about this report, it's gotten really great reviews. In fact, I'm going to do a little bit of shameless promotion. Vox, which is no easy news outlet in terms of their reporting, they called this report, and I quote, the most detailed and well thought out plan for addressing climate change that has ever been a part of U.S. politics. And I'm just very grateful that we were part of that. And also, when you look at what Joe Biden has announced with his climate plan, it tracks very nicely with what we've done in the House. And you can really envision a scenario in January of 2021 where we have a new president and vice president with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, hopefully a true partnership with the Senate and Chuck Schumer as majority leader of the Senate. And then, of course, if we maintain the House Democratic majority, then we're off to the races and we can really get a lot of these things done. But the whole premise behind our Select Committee report was that we had to have solutions that were commensurate with the science. And specifically, we had to reduce greenhouse gas emissions enough to actually be able to contain the worst of the climate crisis. And so that means limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Again, very ambitious goals, net zero across the economy by 2050 and the power sector by 2040. And we'll get to some of the specifics. 12 pillars in the report. We'll go through them briefly. Number one, invest in infrastructure to build a just, equitable, and resilient clean energy economy. Building a cleaner and more resilient electricity sector. Again, zero net economy-wide by 2050, zero net in the electricity sector by 2040. We believe that'll create over 500,000 jobs annually, that transition to sustainability. Building a cleaner and more resilient transportation sector. I was so excited about this. We have as one of the bills, there's 7 of our bills that made it into the report. One of them is called the ZEV Act, Zero Emission Vehicles Act, that I'm doing with Jeff Merkley. And that bill basically says that all new car sales need to be zero emission by 2035. And I'm really excited about the prospect of that bill becoming law, and also what we're going to do for trucks and buses and all the rest. We've got to go to electrification. We've got to go to zero emissions, and we have to make sure we do it soon. Then building and upgrading homes and businesses to maximize energy efficiency and to eliminate emissions. And that really includes a lot of different things, requiring buildings. We're going to start with federal buildings, but eventually requiring more and more buildings to be net zero emissions. And we're going to do the federal buildings by 2030. Benchmarking requirements for commercial buildings. A lot of these things we're already doing in California with Title 24 building standards, and really expanding upon the lessons learned in California on the national stage. Large-scale weatherization, efficiency in low-income and frontline communities, investing in water systems to provide clean water, preparing the nation's telecommunications networks for climate impacts, and plugging leaks and cutting pollution. And this has been in the news this week. This is the exact opposite of what the Trump administration is doing. Plugging leaks and cutting pollution from America's oil and gas infrastructure. And among the many awful executive actions taken by this administration, just this past week, they decided to undermine the progress we've made around methane, which is a very potent, short-lived climate pollutant, depending on the analysis, 25 to 80 times more potent in trapping heat in the atmosphere. So what did the Trump people do? They did exactly what some of the oil lobbyists wanted them to do, which is say, who cares about fugitive methane emissions? A disaster. So we've got a lot of work to do. That's pillar one. I'll turn it over to Katie for pillar two.
Thanks so much, Mike. And I just want to say I care about methane emission. And I think you're making a great point for people that when we talk so much about carbon, but methane is a really big part of what's contributing to climate change. So we actually have our agencies doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to talk about the second pillar, which is to drive innovation and deployment of clean energy and deep carbonization technologies. So it's really two-pronged. It's not enough to innovate if it sits in a lab and doesn't actually get used. So it's innovation and deployment. So how would the climate plan propose to do that? First, and this is near and dear to my heart, being home to the University of California, Irvine, I know it's important to Mike with UCSD, but it's boosting funding for federal clean energy research, development, and demonstration. And this happens both at universities, but also with private partners who are working on green technologies. And one of the most fun things I've gotten to do as a congressperson is tour some of those green energy labs and places that are doing this innovative work. So step up the federal funding to support clean energy research. The second part of how we're going to innovate and deploy is we're going to prioritize climate in the Department of Energy's mission and reorganize the Department of Energy to meet that goal. And I think this raises an interesting kind of historical point. The Department of Energy wasn't around when this country was founded. The Department of Energy, actually, its entire existence and its mission came out of needs to innovate in the energy sector. And the Department of Energy has actually lost that innovation focus and instead is clinging to old technology. So we know we have a lot of work to do at our agencies in the wake of a Trump presidency. And when we go to do that work at DOE, at the Department of Energy, we're going to make sure that they are putting climate and innovation first, which really is what our Department of Energy was founded upon. And then the last part about this is expanding an existing program at the Department of Energy that is a loan guarantee program. And what it does is help leverage private investment to deploy carbonization technologies that reduce and capture and limit carbon, and climate resilient infrastructure, which is something that Mike was touching on. So again, this is about bringing together, adding public investment to what's been going on in the private sector and right-sizing the level of federal and private capital to the needs that we have to both quickly innovate and quickly deploy.
Pillar number 3 is transforming U.S. industry and expanding domestic manufacturing of clean energy and zero emission technologies. And this is so important, particularly right now at a moment in time where we've got 28 million people because of the pandemic filed for unemployment. We need to put millions and millions of Americans back to work. And I will say until I'm blue in the face that we can do it with the clean energy jobs of the future. And this is our moment where we can really lead again on the global stage. You know, I had the great honor to get to go to Madrid as part of the 25th COP, the UN Climate Conference. And it was so disheartening to see the lack of our leadership from this administration. And really their presence there was to try to export liquefied natural gas to the rest of the world. We need to lead again. And that means really corralling the major industrialized countries of the world, certainly China and India and others, to ensure that we are taking those collective actions to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But it really does need to start in the United States. I am convinced that in 30, 40 years' time, we will be using an entirely new suite of technologies for transportation, for buildings, for generating electricity. And the question that we all have to ask is whether those technologies are going to be developed and manufactured here in the United States, or whether we're going to be using technologies that have been developed and manufactured in China and India and the rest of the world. And it is a massive economic opportunity. And with the thinking of the current administration, we are going to miss out. We're going to miss out to line the pockets of a very narrow set of fossil fuel interests. We have a huge economic opportunity if we are only smart enough to harness it and take advantage of it. So rebuilding U.S. industry for global climate leadership, investing in domestic manufacturing of clean energy, clean vehicle, and zero emission technologies, and developing, manufacturing, and deploying cutting-edge carbon removal technology here in America. And Joe Biden's climate plan and infrastructure plan does a great job in highlighting all of that as well. And we can do it. And we are going to do it, particularly with the new administration.
Great. And our fourth pillar is break down barriers for clean energy technology. So we're talking about what the potential is of clean energy and some of these other pillars, but there are reasons that we have not done some of this energy transformation that we need to. Step 1, eliminate tax breaks for oil and gas companies, period. We have to work to put clean energy on a level playing field, and in fact, to incentivize clean energy. But for decades, the oil and gas industry has curried favor in Washington, and they've built policies that enable them to hang on. So we need to break down those barriers, and that starts with eliminating tax breaks for large oil and gas companies. And we also need to be willing to put a price on carbon. Now, carbon pricing isn't a panacea. It's not going to solve everything, but it is a tool in the toolkit. It can make a difference. And what we're dealing with here, and I'm a proud capitalist and I love to think about it this way, is when you have an industry like oil and gas and they go to Washington and lobby and lobby and lobby millions and millions a year in corporate PAC money, and lobbyist money, then they get policies that favor them. And so it's about making sure that we're repealing those policies, putting clean energy on a level playing field, and carbon pricing is really about how we're going to correct a market failure. If we didn't have these lobbying powers, if we didn't have big energy, big oil and big gas buying the policy that they want, including tax policy, then clean energy would be on a level playing field. So we need to do that. And relatedly, we also need to make sure that we're developing and implementing policies to make sure that energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries aren't facing unfair competition from foreign competitors who use dirty technology. So what Mike said is absolutely right about certain economies who are leading the way in investing in clean energy, and the United States has lost valuable time during President Trump's time in office. But there are other countries that are willing to use dirty technology and create competition barriers to clean energy for companies here. So we need to level that playing field, break down those barriers, and let clean energy and the innovation that it's going to unleash move us forward.
Pillar number 5 is investing in America's workers and building a fair economy. This means securing workers' right to organize and to unionize and to negotiate for higher wages, safer working conditions, and better benefits. We should be committing federal funding only to those projects that meet strong labor standards, and we should be considering new policies for clean energy and for vehicles that support strong labor standards. We need to establish a National Economic Transition Office to coordinate, scale up, and target federal economic and workforce development assistance to communities and workers. And we also need to be thinking about our coal industry veterans and supporting their healthcare needs as well. We've got to create jobs through conservation and reclamation and the restoration of coal mines and abandoned wells. And we've been working on that in the House Natural Resources Committee. And I think there's actually some bipartisan support there that we can actually agree upon. And look, at the end of the day, we've got to rebuild this economy with a union label from the middle out rather than the top down. And I know we can do it. Again, it all comes down to the decision that the nation's going to make in 80 days. What kind of future do we want? Do we want one that works for everyone or just for those at the very top? And just to add to what Katie said on the last pillar, since the Citizens United decision, the fossil fuel industry has contributed over $300 million to federal elections. They lobby on the order of $80 to $100 million a year. And we wonder why we can't get anything done on a bipartisan basis on climate. That's why. So on top of all this, in our report is campaign finance reform. And I think that's needed as well. So Katie, back over to you. I think we're on number 6.
Yep. And I really love that point about campaign finance. And really proud, Mike, that we are part of a new class of freshmen, so many of whom don't take corporate PAC money, don't take money from oil and gas. It's a big
Absolutely.
change we're making in our Congress, but there's more that we're going to accomplish with electing more folks in 2020 who share those folks and re-electing people. So we're going to keep building on that. I just wanted to say too, Mike, I love this point about investing in workers and strengthening union jobs. And I want to share with the audience a term that before I was elected, I hadn't heard much about, or I guess before I ran for office, I hadn't heard much about, which is the Blue-Green Alliance. And as my daughter said, blue and green, that makes turquoise. That's true. But when we talk about Blue-Green Alliance, we're talking about bringing together climate activists, environmental activists, that's the green, together with blue, talking about blue-collar workers, union workers. And so it's really one of the things that this report reflects that I think our infrastructure bill also reflects is a lot of partnership between our allies in labor and our allies in the environmental movement. And that's, I think, part of politically how we're going to move this forward. And so I wanted to talk in the 6th pillar about environmental justice and the importance of understanding this as a distinct but complementary concept to addressing climate change. So environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, cultural, national origin, or income, with regard to the development, the implementation, and the enforcement of environmental laws. And the goal here is to ensure that all people have the same level of protection from environmental and health hazards. And we want to make sure that all people also have the equal access to participate in environmental policy. When the EPA is deciding something, how do we make sure that those in the community who will be affected by the EPA's decision are getting a meaningful voice in the process? So environmental justice has to be at the center of any federal climate and environmental policy. And so some of the ways that we do that are directing the EPA to consider not just the effect of any particular project it might be permitting, but to look at the cumulative effect. That is, at the concentration of certain polluting activity in certain areas, often low-income communities of color, and then prioritizing those communities for cleanup and for new clean energy jobs. And this will involve a lot of collaboration, not just with community partners at the local and county level, but also with tribal communities, with environmental justice advocates, with nonprofits, with Department of Agriculture. But bringing environmental justice into this process is really about creating that nationwide buy-in to clean energy and how it will help improve the health and well-being of every single American. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike, for number 7.
Number 7 is very important and sometimes overlooked, and that's the public health impacts of climate change. So Pillar 7 is improving public health and managing climate risks to our health infrastructure, specifically developing a national strategic action plan to help communities and health departments prepare for and respond to climate-related health risks, including disproportionate harms to environmental justice communities. Increasing support for global surveillance in response to potential health threats abroad as well. Strengthening the supply chains for health commodities. Boy, that's been very clear, the inadequacy of our supply chain management with the COVID pandemic. Expanding the CDC's capacity to support state, local, tribal, and territorial health departments in their climate-related work. Boy, again, all these things were in our report before the pandemic, and it's only become that much clearer how important all these things really are and how behind we really are and how much we really need to rebuild the capacity of our public health system. And it's going to take a new administration to do it, because we've been asking the Trump administration even for a testing plan since May, and they've provided nothing of value, that is. Increasing funding for programs to make hospitals more resilient to climate impacts, and increasing support to address the mental and emotional health effects of climate impacts. This is a huge deal. This cannot be overlooked. It's one of those things often that if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, but we've got to be planning ahead as we consider the public health impacts of climate change, which all projections suggest are going to be vast. So with that, number 8, Katie.
All right, number 8 is invest in American agriculture for climate solutions. This is incredibly important. Agriculture has an environmental impact, and there's no way around that fact. But what we can be doing is making sure that we're supporting the efforts of America's farmers and ranchers to use climate stewardship practices. And this means things like more money for the Farm Bill conservation programs and expanding technical assistance to farmers and ranchers who want to engage in climate mitigation and resilience. My parents were farmers in Iowa in the 1980s. And so I know that it's hard for farmers to make this shift to environmental policy. But I can remember when the Conservation Reserve Program was rolled out as part of the 1980s Farm Bill to help struggling farmers. And we saw land that was been farming aggressively be allowed to rest. And we saw our habitat start to come back, and it ultimately created more productive agriculture. And I think we can all agree that it's important as a matter of national security. It's important as a matter of economic well-being for America to continue having a role in food production. That's something that we are always going to want to continue our strong tradition of doing here. But we have to be helping support our farmers and our ranchers, including smaller producers, in adopting climate-friendly policies. And so as we think about our agricultural sector going forward, this is where that collaboration between the Department of Energy and the Department of Agriculture is going to come. But Mike and I have some terrific colleagues, including folks like Cindy Axney, who represents the area of Iowa where I grew up. And she is excited about the prospect of American farmers gaining a global competitive advantage by switching to less climate harmful agricultural production policies. So I'm really excited about this one. And I think it's really an important part we can't ignore. It's not just big oil and big gas. It's also in the climate impact of sectors that we desperately need, like food production.
Absolutely. And Cindy and Abby Finkenauer are both doing such a great job in Iowa. So hope that if you haven't heard of them, that you go check their websites out and help them out if you can. Number nine is really exciting, actually, because it's a bipartisan pillar. And a good friend of mine on the other side of the aisle is Garrett Graves. He's a ranking member. He's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Garrett and I disagree on all kinds of things. If you watch our House Natural Resources hearing, from time to time, we will yell at each other and get upset at each other. But he's a good friend of mine, and he agrees, representing Baton Rouge, that we have to make our communities more resilient. So around resilience, Pillar 9, make U.S. communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. That means supporting community leadership in climate resilience and equity, building and rebuilding based on actionable science, codes, and standards, reducing climate disaster risks, accelerating disaster recovery, and making climate resilience planning an essential element of federal agency operations. Now, I know that my friend Garrett, my friend Buddy Carter, they agree on this stuff. This is a good area where we can build on hopefully some bipartisan momentum. The challenge is that our solutions to want to do anything about the greenhouse gas emissions in the first place that cause some of these problems, that's where all the disconnect is. But nonetheless, resilience is an area of great bipartisan agreement and an area where we can work together. And I'm asked a lot about that, Katie. How can we actually work together? And there's great momentum to do more on resilience and disaster preparedness.
Which is great, because number 10 is also an area where we have bipartisan agreement, which is making sure that we're protecting and restoring America's lands, waters, ocean, and wildlife. And this is something where you can actually see we have, and Mike and I will both tell you, there have not been a lot of bills that the Senate has been willing to move. But here's an area where you can actually see Congress taking productive action. And so the example here is that last year we permanently authorized the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the LCWF, in honor of John Dingell, long-serving Michigan Congress member. It's a major step in the right direction. And then we passed, and it was signed into law on August 4th, just very recently, the name for the late Congressman John Lewis, the Great American Outdoors Act. And what this does is make permanent $900 million a year in guaranteed funding for those land and water conservation funds. So we're talking about rebuilding campgrounds. We're talking about trail maintenance. We're talking about looking at our national forests, our national parks, and investing in infrastructure projects that along the way will help make those things more climate resilient and reduce the effects of pollution there. And related to this, and I think this is one of the most, for me, eye-popping facts in the entire report. I would have definitely gotten this wrong if we were playing Climate Jeopardy, which I would never agree to do with Mike Levin.
We'll do it. We ought to do it. Be fun.
No Climate Jeopardy with Mike Levin, because he'd win. This really shocked me, Mike. Almost a quarter of our total U.S. carbon dioxide emissions is coming from fossil fuel extraction on public lands. Our national parks, our public lands, our wildlife refuges, our national forests, they are actually a net emitter of carbon, when they have so much potential, of course, to help absorb carbon, to help reduce and store carbon, to reduce pollution in the air. But right now, because we're using them for fossil fuel extraction, something that President Trump has been eager to expand rather than restrict, Our national parks actually are responsible for our federal lands, I should say, excuse me, our federal lands are responsible for almost a quarter of our US carbon dioxide production. So that needs to change. We need to be using these protected lands to help us control carbon, to help reduce pollution, to help store carbon, not using them to extract fossil fuels. So that is a major area where I think, again, Mike, we've seen the American people love our natural lands. They're enjoyed for recreation, for so many different kinds of activities. This is an area where we've shown some bipartisan cooperation already with the Great American Outdoors Act, but there's so much more that we can accomplish beginning in January.
Absolutely right, Katie. And the Great American Outdoors Act is, I think, the only thing in our report that has actually become law since our report. And it's a great story. I mean, President Trump still can't pronounce Yosemite, but that's okay. We got this through the Senate, which was really remarkable. I think it's important for our audience to know that it took every Senate Democrat voting for it. And I think maybe a plurality of the Senate Republicans voted for it. In the House, the vote was 310 to 107. And more Republicans, if you can believe it, were actually against the LWCF and the Great American Outdoors Act and for it. A couple of Democrats, but virtually all Democrats were for it. So this is really a big deal. There's a $9 billion maintenance backlog in our national parks, $600 million alone for Yosemite. And there's also a huge amount of LWCF funds that come to California, about $2.5 billion worth have come to California. And I think in both of our districts, we've got a number. I know in ours, we've got, San Clemente State Beach, Carlsbad State Beach, Torrey Pines, a lot of our places that we cherish were directly
National
funded.
Forest is part of my district, so absolutely.
Well, in all of our districts where we actually have projects and see the benefit of LWCF, I think we all voted for it. But this is a huge deal. This is the biggest win for conservation in many, many years. But I guess the only thing I'd add is that there's a long way to go. This administration still wants to drill anywhere and everywhere that they can, including off the Southern California coast. I know that for a fact because I asked the Interior Secretary, David Bernhardt, when I got to Congress. He was nice enough to have a one-on-one. We haven't had one since. But I said, what confidence can you give me and the voters the constituents of our district who don't want to see drill rigs off the Southern California coast that you're not going to intend to drill? And he said, well, I'll follow the law. So that's, it's good news that we've got Javier Becerra fighting at every turn to keep our coastline free of his drilling. But make no mistake, if they are elected again, if Trump gets a second term, they will try to exploit the Monterey Shale, still the largest untapped oil reserve in the United States, we think. And that goes right off the Los Angeles and Ventura County coastline. So we've got to prevent that from happening. They've also got 1 million acres of our land in California, federal land, that they want to frack and drill on. And if they get a second term, they're going to try to do that as well. So keep an eye on this. Even if Biden and Harris win in the weeks after, watch out for the Trump Department of Interior trying to drill off the California coast, maybe even the Florida coast, although hopefully Rick Scott, when he was the governor, he prevented them from doing it. We'll see what he does as senator, but keep an eye out for that. Pillar number, what are we on? 10. No, we're on 11. 11. Wow, almost there. Confront climate risks to America's national security and restore America's leadership on the international stage. Well, we've talked about this a bit, but the Trump administration has really been America. They call it America first. It's really Trump first, but we have ceded our global leadership on this issue. We are no longer leading the way. And I would offer to our audience that without the United States leading the way, the rest of the developed world will not take the actions necessary to reduce greenhouse gas emissions enough to actually meet the scientific challenges that we face. I don't see China doing it without us pushing them. I don't see India doing it. China's the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, about 28%. We're second with about half of that. India's third with about half of what we do, and then Russia's fourth with about 4%. None of those other countries are going to do it without us leading the way. And moreover, I don't see any European nation, I don't see Canada or anybody else, as much as we've got great allies all around the world. Without our global leadership, it's simply not going to happen. So the defeatism of, the U.S. can't do it alone, No, but we can lead a global coalition. That's what President Obama did with the Paris Climate Agreement. That's what we can do again. The scary thing, we'll get to go, hopefully we'll get reelected. We'll still be in the majority. We'll get to go to Glasgow, Scotland, for the 26th climate conference. It was supposed to be 5 days after the election in November, and I was looking forward to it. I've never been to Scotland, but we would go either with a new president and new vice president and new direction to again lead the world, or we would go once again having to apologize for the lack of American action around greenhouse gas reduction. And I know where I want to go in 2021 with the House majority, with the Senate majority, and with the new administration. We can lead the world again. So Pillar 11, really important, Katie.
Yep, absolutely. And, we voted, Mike, to ban the use of federal funding, to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And I think a lot of people rightfully said, that's it. And that was never it. But we are trying to hold back an administration that is taking us backwards. At the same time, I think what's so exciting about this report and about this town hall and about being, 80 days from Election Day, is we're in a moment where we can talk about what we're going to do going forward. And so it's just really exciting to hear about some of these ideas. The last pillar is one that we've already hinted at kind of throughout this talk, which is making sure that we are strengthening America's core institutions to facilitate climate action. So when you hear this pillar, you're like, what's a core institution? What does facilitate climate action mean? Seems like a little bit of mumbo jumbo. So let me break it down for you. We have to strengthen our democracy. If we suppress the votes, for example, of Black and Indigenous and people of color who are most affected by pollution and environmental harms, if we suppress their voices at the ballot box, then we will not elect representatives who will put climate justice and climate change at the core. If we don't tackle, as Mike mentioned, if we don't enact H.R. 1, which we passed through the House, but is sitting in the Senate, which would strengthen campaign finance reform, which would protect the right to vote and would fight corruption, root out corruption, then we are going to continue to see the oil and gas industry try to buy policy that hurts all of us to line their own pockets. So campaign finance reform and protecting voters is a big part of it when we talk about core institutions, but it's not the only thing. I want to give a couple other examples. Many of you know I love my whiteboard. I love to crunch the numbers. So here are two more for you. One of them is that our Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, is a really important role here. When you write a bill and you propose to do something in Congress, your bill is sent to the CBO, to the Congressional Budget Office, which gives it a score, basically looking at how much it would cost or save to enact that law. Under current rules and current procedures, the CBO fails to accurately weigh the potential benefits of enacting climate-friendly policies. So things that really would have a huge economic savings in the long run because they would transition us to sustainable environmental policy don't get that kind of score that fully recognizes this. And this can make it harder for bills to get across the finish line. Similarly, we have to make sure that we're protecting those officials who are designed and who are there, whose job it is to blow the whistle on corruption and on policy that would set us back. And we have seen so many attacks with President Trump on our inspector general community. It is so disheartening. Those inspector generals, they exist in every single department, including places like the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency. And we need to make sure that their independence is protected. And what we've seen during this pandemic was, as we all were focusing on public health, which, as Mike pointed out in one of his pillars, has a direct relationship with climate and pollution, we've seen Trump's Environmental Protection Agency announce that in the midst of a respiratory disease, a global pandemic, a public health emergency, that they weren't going to enforce pollution rules. In essence, saying to big polluters, go ahead, break the law for as long as COVID-19 lasts, because we're going to be looking the other way. So I helped lead a letter to Andrew Wheeler, the head of the EPA, trying to pressure the agency to keep up their environmental enforcement efforts, which are more important now than ever. And then the last part about this, when we talk about core institutions, has to be talking about our educational system. I think that both Mike and I, as parents of school-age kids, elementary school kids, we've seen how much our kids here in California are learning about the environment, about climate, about their role in climate change, about the challenges we face. But that is not the curriculum in every part of the United States. And so we need to make sure that we're equipping the next generation to come with science-based information about what their role is and what we need to do. And then we need to be funding climate science, not only building and creating the next generation of climate scientists and supporting the amazing research projects right here in our own backyard at places like UCSD, at places like UC Irvine that are going to help us address this problem. So let's build that next generation of climate scientists. Let's fund their innovative ideas. This is not just important for how we actually tackle climate change, for giving us the innovative ideas and how to deploy them, but it's also a tremendously important part of job creation for the future and global competition on the world stage. So I know it didn't sound like much when I said it, but let's repeat it again. Let's strengthen America's core institutions, including our democracy, our educational system, and our administrative agencies, so that they are all helping to facilitate climate action. So with that, Mike, we made it through all 12 pillars.
I love it. We got to get to the questions. Go for it. I'm so excited about this. I have to tell you, this was so cool just to be able to go through these pillars with you. And we are so fortunate to have UCI and UCSD, two of the preeminent institutions in the entire world when it comes to microgrid technology, when it comes to clean energy research. We have really an abundance of great intellectual leadership in our districts. And I think our districts are the best. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, we have that great research. And we also, let's face it, Mike, we have two of the most beautiful districts in the entire United States.
Absolutely.
And they are also climate fragile.
Yep.
So I think it's very easy as you drive the highway, I think about it a lot. I got on the highway the other day and it said, my GPS said, stay in the 6 middle lanes. And I thought, what a statement about our transportation challenges here in Southern California. So we have some great questions from students. And I just want to say how Mike and I were talking before this started, how thrilled we are that our young people submitted amazing questions and are joining with us today. This is an issue that we need people of every age to be leading on. But I'm particularly excited about the way that we're seeing young people drive this climate-focused agenda forward. So our first question comes from in Irvine, and she asks, why is a collaborative international effort to resolve global warming more important than individual countries working on their own? And so, of course, every country has a role. There is no country on this beautiful earth that doesn't have a role in addressing climate change. But each country's actions have effects on the places that abut it, have effects on the overall climate. So there's a real potential. We are not going to get to net zero by 2050 with a company by company or city by city, county by county, even country by country approach. We are going to need a worldwide strategy. We're going to need to share the technology that we develop here, and we're going to need to be humble enough to learn from other countries that are making progress in other areas or making progress faster than we are. During the COVID-19 pandemic, even though people around the world stayed at home and dramatically altered their everyday lives, daily global carbon dioxide emissions only declined 17% in early April 2020 compared with the year before in 2019. So we simply cannot get this done alone. When every Californian was staying home with doors closed, we still had cars off the road, we still were emitting too much carbon. And so we definitely benefit from a coordinated approach. At the same time, I want to be really clear. Saying that it takes an international coordinated effort doesn't mean that we let any country off the hook, least of all ourselves. If we want to have the moral high ground to be able to lead on the world stage and to get polluting countries to clean up their act, we need to be showing that we're doing it here at home. And the Trump presidency, frankly, has damaged our ability to do that. And that's something that I have a lot of confidence that Joe Biden will be able to repair, and will work with Senator Harris to repair on day one as they take office.
Well said, Katie. Second question comes from Savannah in Ladera Ranch. Savannah says, it's common to hear Democrats getting behind climate change action, but as a member of Congress, how much effort do you see from Republicans to work with the Democrats to solve the climate change crisis? Well, Savannah, I've gotten to know a lot of the Republicans who are most interested in this issue. When the Speaker created the new Select Committee, there were 9 Democrats that were appointed. There were also, I believe, 6 Republicans as well. And I've gotten to know several of them. And as I mentioned, we work together on specifically things like resiliency, because they see their districts being hard hit just as our districts are here. The other areas are things like renewable energy on our public lands. Paul Gosar of Arizona, and I disagree with Paul on pretty much everything except, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there are areas of common ground, but let's just say we've disagreed plenty, but we agree on the opportunity to look at our public lands, and to the extent that there are areas where they can be developed in an environmentally responsible fashion for renewable energy development, that we ought to think about doing that. What I don't want to see, of course, is oil and gas leases that go unused, and lands that are allowed to deteriorate as a result. And there's still a lot of area where we don't agree. But PLREDA, the Public Land Renewable Energy Development Act, would enable 25 gigawatts of new renewable energy on our public lands by 2025. And that's something that Paul and I have worked together on, and we've got around 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats on that bill, and I think we can move it. Look, I think we've got to work together. This is one planet that we all inhabit, and we've got to do all we can to try to find common ground. That's what I'll continue to do.
Absolutely. So our next question comes from Thomas in San Diego. And he says, if Joe Biden wins, I just want to amend this question, Thomas, and say, when Joe Biden wins and Democrats take back the Senate, and not just retain the House, Thomas, but grow our House majority, what specific global warming action would be prioritized given the opportunity? So Biden has an excellent climate plan, and really exciting the way that he put it together, working with a lot of people, many of whom are quite progressive, to create a climate plan that brought advocates and best minds together. And net zero emissions is really at the core of Biden's plan to tackle global warming, which makes it very, very consistent with the Select Committee's climate crisis report. So to get there by 2050, which again is the goal in the climate report, he would propose reversing the Trump tax cuts and use that money to fund a historic investment in clean energy research and infrastructure. And so on day one, he's committed to making those investments to the tune of $1.7 trillion over the next decade to rebuild and to ensure that our buildings, our water systems, transportation, and energy infrastructure both reduce what they add to climate change as a problem, but also can withstand the effects of global warming that will happen. So obviously this includes recommitting to the Paris Agreement, but also he has said it's not enough just to recommit. It's not enough to look back and say, we'll get back in that agreement we made many years ago. We need to be asking ourselves what we need to do going forward. And then the last part of this, which is something where I think we'll see great cooperation between Vice President Biden and Senator Harris when they become our president and vice president, is enforcement of our pollution laws. And Kamala Harris's role as a prosecutor, as the state attorney general, she will be fierce in making sure that if there is a settlement, if there is a regulation, if there is a rule, it actually gets followed, no matter how big the corporation is. And I saw that firsthand when I worked with her on the big banks. She didn't just sign a deal and have a press conference. She put me and a team at UC Irvine to work all across the state to make sure the banks actually did what they promised to do. And it should be the exact same thing with pollution. If a company is polluted and they're being held accountable, They can't just promise to clean it up. They need to actually do it. If they promise to quit polluting, they need to actually make those changes. So I'm excited about the Biden-Harris climate plan, but I also urge all of us to know that we have a role in continuing to push them, to making sure that this stays at the very, very top of their agenda. And I think that's an exciting opportunity for all of us in this country to be part of moving the Biden-Harris climate agenda forward.
Absolutely. Heath in Dana Point asks, what effects of climate change and global warming will I see during my lifetime or even the next few decades? Well, Heath, I'm right down the road from you in San Juan Capistrano, and I can tell you that I've been following fairly closely the impact on our great state of California in the past few decades and the projections over the next several decades. One of them is obviously hotter temperatures, which we're already seeing. And today is a perfect example of that. Not confusing climate for weather, but nonetheless, the trends suggest hotter temperatures, drier conditions. We're going to have real water resource issues in California. And we have to have resiliency and we have to have diversity in our water supply. The Sierra Nevada snowpack currently provides a disproportionate amount of our water resources in California. And we've built our resource strategy around a 20th century model, not taking into account the full impact of climate change. We're going to have to dramatically rethink this. And a lot of the research being done at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is right at the very southern tip of my district, looks at things like atmospheric river conditions and really points out the inadequacy in our water supply strategy. So we're going to have to really think through that. Then there are, of course, wildfires. We have 100 million acres of land in California. 80% of it is either forest or rangelands, and we're seeing more extreme year-round wildfires, including right now, which dramatically restricts our resources and really needs to be addressed. Coastal threats. We've got 85% of our population living in coastal counties in California, including Orange County, of course, San Diego County. I'm very honored that I've got a beautiful coastal district, but I'm also acutely aware of sea level rise, and all the projections, again, from Scripps and UCI and UCSD suggest this is going to be very difficult. I've got bluffs to protect. I've got the Los San Rail Corridor, Los Angeles, San Diego Rail Corridor running right through the heart of my district. And we have seen a dramatic destabilization. We had bluff collapses last year that led to the tragic death of a number of my constituents. And I've worked very hard with the Army Corps of Engineers and others to try to address the bluffs and the rail corridor, which is so important for passenger travel, commercial travel. All of that is at risk. And the way that we move goods, the way that we move people, all needs to be thought through in the context of our changing climate in Southern California. So I guess, Heath, the answer is basically you're going to see the impacts of climate change in many different aspects of your life. And that's why we need to be prepared that this is coming.
Great. So I now want to take a question from Sam in Rancho Santa Margarita here in the 45th District. Sam asks, how can we make environmental measures appealing to corporations and perhaps therefore more appealing to libertarians or conservatives? So I think there's a couple points here. One is a lot of what we talk about in the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis report is about innovation. And part of that is that we need new tools to actually get to our goal of actually stopping the harmful effects of climate change. But it's also because we need to make sure that environmentally friendly practices are at a price point where corporations can afford to use them. And this includes making sure that small businesses don't get left behind in climate policies. So what we're seeing sometimes is larger businesses who are touting their climate, big corporations that are touting their climate-friendly policies, but we need to bring down the cost of environmentally friendly practices so that everybody can do it. So I'll give you a great example of this. My mom lives out of state. She lives in another part of the country. And if she wants to have recycling, she has to pay extra to get recycling at her curb. So every time I go to her house, it's this constant battle. Where's your recycling mom? I don't think I should have to pay extra to have recycling. I don't think she should either. But that's a great example of we have to make these things cost effective. We also have to hold big corporations accountable. And there's a role for us as shareholders of corporations, for investment funds, to be active about this, to push corporations to have a climate plan, to have steps that they're taking to reduce their contributions to global warming, and to be taking environmentally friendly action. And so we are seeing, I think, more pressure from shareholders and from activists asking these tough questions of CEOs. This came up in our Financial Services Committee when we were questioning Jerome Powell, and a number of my colleagues asked him why the United States has not joined in an international effort to look at the role of central banks in trying to understand the potential economic global instability that could result could happen as a result of climate change. And his answer was, well, I'm not a climate scientist. Fair enough. He's not, but he is in charge of our economic stability. And there's no doubt that if we don't combat global warming, if we don't create more environmentally friendly policies, that is going to have an effect on our economy and on our economic stability. And so I think talking about those things and really being willing to hold corporations accountable, not being afraid to question CEOs. And, Mike mentioned the prior question, bipartisan cooperation. And I think it's when you look at, we've talked a lot about those who don't take corporate PAC money, why Mike and I don't take money from big oil and big gas. There have been a lot more members of the House who share our commitment to that. But sadly, I think for me, Mike, at least, it's sad that those are all Democrats. We haven't seen Republican members yet who are willing to stand up to oil and gas and say, you cannot buy my views on environmental policy. My views on protecting our planet are not for sale. And that's something that I hope that we see in the upcoming years, because I think that is part of what's holding Republicans back from being the climate allies that I think they could be and should be.
I think you're right, and I wish there were an easy answer to how we make that happen. And I think it's just going to take time. But I think the personal experiences of our colleagues in their own districts dealing with the impacts of climate change, I think, will help a lot. And then the economic opportunity that is presented by clean energy and accelerating the transition, creating the jobs that will really help drive the economies in these districts. I think hopefully that will, in the end, that will weigh very heavily on our colleagues' minds. You brought up plastic recycling. That's a whole another issue. Where I think where will the fossil fuel companies turn as we accelerate the transition? And I think a lot of them will turn to petrochemicals and single-use plastics. So that's a whole other issue. And we don't recycle nearly enough plastic that's eligible to be recycled. Just if you go to the store and you see a recycling logo on there, it doesn't mean it's going to get recycled. It's down under 10%. So we have something else called the Stop Plastic Pollution Act that we're working on. Yet another big challenge and big problem as well.
And Mike, can I just add there, plastic recycling here in the U.S., there's so much more that we can do, but it's also making investments and thinking about, we talked about strengthening the core institutions, right, with a climate eye. One of those core institutions is thinking about America's foreign aid to other countries with an eye toward climate. So many countries simply do not have any garbage system or sanitation system at all. So while we need to make sure here that we're doing things like using reusable bottles, things like that, we also need to understand that in many countries, there's simply no sanitation system. And so things get thrown into waterways, into rivers, into ditches. So thinking about how can we use part of the foreign aid assistance that we give to countries who have developing economies that we're trying to nurture their democracies to helping them develop sanitation practices. And so it doesn't seem sexy, but garbage systems in foreign countries actually is a big part of how we combat a problem like ocean plastic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what we're doing now is we're sending a lot to Indonesia, and they're incinerating a lot of it. They're making a lot of people sick by incinerating a lot of it. We were sending to China a huge amount of our plastic, and they were recycling some, but a lot of it is too low quality to be of value in recycling. So they were burning it as well. And finally, their government had enough of taking our plastic. So it's a massive problem, and something that I think we're going to need to address over the coming years, coming decades. Here's another one from Anna in Ladera Ranch. Anna asks, is there even any hope left to fight a majority of the effects of climate change, or is it getting to be too late at this point? Well, we don't have much time, but I think there is hope. And that's based on the best research that we have from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which suggests that basically we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we have to have solutions that are commensurate with that. And that means that man-made carbon dioxide emissions must fall by 45% from global 2010 levels by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. That's what the IPCC says is necessary, and that's what our report proposes. Now, that's global in scale, which means that in addition to doing everything to reduce those emissions here in the United States, we have to lead the way and encourage the rest of the world to do it as well. But we always have to have hope. And I think that we've got to get working. We've got to really make some big progress in the next 5 or 10 years to set us on that course. But it can be done, Anna, and we've got to keep the hope that we can do it.
And just to add there, Mike, it's so great how you frame that. But it's also when a problem is hard, then we have to fight harder to tackle it. So we need to take action now. It's absolutely important. But also, as we talk about the prior question from Sam and Interest and Margarita about how do we appeal to conservatives, one of the things to point out to people is the longer we wait to take this action, the more expensive and more difficult it's going to be to do it. So if you're thinking about kind of from a fiscal conservative point of view about this, the cheapest, most cost-effective thing to do is to address climate policy now. Each day, each month, each year that we wait makes it more expensive and less effective. And so from a conservative point of view, even, I think that's an argument for why there should be some real urgency around this. With that, I'm going to take the next question is from Izzy in Laguna Woods. And Izzy says, it seems as though the main reason to oppose global warming action is to protect the economy. Can you explain why the benefits of taking steps to protect the planet outweigh the economic costs? So I just gave you one example, which is we are going to have to grapple with this, and the sooner we do it, the cheaper it will be. But since 2005, and about the last 15 years, the United States has experienced more than $150 billion, more than 150 billion dollar events that total 1.1 trillion. These numbers get really big. So we've had more than 150 events of $1 billion plus. They total up to 1.1 trillion, more than 7,500 deaths, and federal disaster assistance costing more than 450 billion, all related to climate change, all related to global warming. So the climate crisis is only going to exacerbate these trends. If we don't take action now, the fire, we have wildfires. We've always had wildfires. They're getting worse. They're lasting longer. They're spreading faster. They're harder to control. It's the exact same thing with other kinds of climate events. As they get more severe, they get more expensive. And so if we care about our economy, we need to actually take these climate actions. And the other point that we've made throughout this conversation is there's also a point about global economic competitiveness. So, Mike talked about who are the nation's world's biggest polluters. We talked about the US, talked about China, we talked about India. China is making infrastructure investment in clean energy. And we need to not just catch them, we need to exceed them. And the reason they're making that investment in clean energy isn't because they've woken up today and suddenly decided that they care about panda bears, as one of our colleagues is fond of saying. It's because they know that the economy that will have the next generations of manufacturing jobs, of innovation will be the economy that can do those things in a climate resistant way. So the economy that's going to have the agricultural jobs, the manufacturing jobs of the future is going to be the economy that has figured out how to do it in a way that does not contribute to global warming. And we in the United States need to be that country. And I think that's a good argument as well when you talk about how do you appeal to people on the other side or with other perspectives, is this is a matter of setting up our economy on the world stage to succeed going forward.
Well, I agree completely. I think that was incredibly well said, Katie. I have a good friend named Marshall Burke. He's an economist at Stanford, and Marshall was one of the people we leaned on for some of the data in our report. And I had, hopefully he won't mind my saying this, I had Marshall go talk to Garrett Graves. I had him go talk to some of our friends on the other side because they're so focused. Some of our friends on the other side are so focused on the cost of doing what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that they miss entirely the cost of doing nothing. And so that's really what Marshall's work has been focused on. And he did a report, and I thought I would just very briefly summarize this. This was published in Nature about 2 years ago, I think. Among the first to assess the economic impact of meeting the Paris climate goals. So he looks at a global perspective. He looks at 40 global climate models to estimate the future economic impact of meeting the 1.5 degree target. And then he figured out that it would save $30 trillion if we actually did this stuff. You say, okay, well, what would it cost? Well, about $500 billion. So the estimated cost of meeting the 1.5 degree target is about $500 billion over the next 30 years. So his bold, underlined, italicized conclusion, the evidence suggests that the benefits of meeting the targets vastly, vastly outweigh the costs. And you can Google Marshall Burke, and he owes me for promoting his work. But he's great, and I hope you check it out. He's spot on. We have to be thinking about the cost of doing nothing, and we never do. Next question. Kate in Mission Viejo says, climate change seems like such an objective problem, and it's hard to understand why it's become a political debate. I agree with that completely, Kate. How can I understand the political obstacles you face to making progressive change? Well, I actually categorize people in a few ways. There are those on the other side that don't believe this is an issue at all. They just don't believe the science at all. These are the same people that refuse to wear masks when the science is overwhelming about that, or refuse to think that COVID is real. There are just anti-science people out there, and you're not going to convince them very easily. But I actually think that's a pretty small minority in Congress. I think most are stuck with the fossil fuel lobby, again, 100 million, 80 to 100 million each year over the last several years, and 300 million in direct contributions to federal elections. One of our dear friends, Senator Warren, likes to say that they could have, the oil companies could have invested in research. Instead, they invested in politicians. And so that's really the problem, in breaking that chain with oil companies contributing money. And then, frankly, a lot of their staffers on our other side going to become lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry, or the members themselves, when they're retired, going to be lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry. It's really stunning to see that revolving door. And then, of course, Trump has taken it to an entirely different level, where he put David Bernhardt, a fossil fuel lobbyist, in charge of the Department of Interior, Andrew Wheeler, a fossil fuel lobbyist, in charge of the EPA. And what I've seen is that the 50 or 60 years of bedrock environmental laws, which were bipartisan, that's what people, I think, need to understand. The creation of the EPA, Nixon was president. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act had overwhelming bipartisan support. National Environmental Policy Act, Endangered Species Act, all those were broadly supported by Republicans. Cap and trade was actually a creation of the George H.W. Bush administration to deal with acid rain. So only since Citizens United, that's the crossroads that I see. Ever since that decision, ever since the influx of unlimited corporate spending from the fossil fuel industry, that's where we've lost our way. And that's what we need to fix. And that's why we've got to end Citizens United. Great organization for those that haven't checked it out.
Great answer, Mike, and I agree with that 100%. The next question comes to us from one of Mike's constituents in La Jolla, Justin. And Justin asks, how much emphasis does Congress place on research for better renewable energy technology? For example, researching how to use nuclear fusion. Here, there is a really big distinction between Democrats and Republicans. And I think this goes to the point about that long-term versus short-term thinking. Democrats, I think, really attempt to be longer-term thinkers when it comes to the economy. And you can see this most pointedly, of course, in President Trump, who each day looks at the stock market and announces that he has sort of solved the economy in perpetuity, not seeming to understand that an economy is a living thing. It's going to change over time. What you do today will have long-term impacts. So I think going back to what Mike said about the research of Marshall Burke and others, it is an investment. We are making an investment in clean energy. We are making an investment in training the next generation of climate scientists. We are making an investment in developing new technology. And this really, again, back to what we were talking about with the Department of Energy, this was actually the point of the Department of Energy. It wasn't to sort of reinvent electricity. It was to think about new and developing technologies. And so right now, our Department of Energy is massively underfunded, particularly relative to what the agency's potential could be to help catapult us forward economically. So the kinds of technologies that they're funding to help develop, and right now they're just funding them too slowly, are very, very valuable. So we're talking about creating energy out of everything from dedicated energy crops to compost to sewage. We need to be putting money into this kind of research. And those research, by the way, research isn't done by nobody. It's done by real people who have jobs as researchers, including the amazing climate scientists and folks working on related projects and companies right here in our congressional districts in the Southern California area. So I think Congress under the Trump administration has really consistently had an anti-research mentality. And, you know, when you think about the concept of making America great again, Trump's motto, how would you make America great? Again, well, you would think about how you could improve things. How can you improve things? You can think about innovation. And yet we have an administration that is actively defunding and limiting investments in innovation. And by the way, this stop, start, when you turn on these programs and then you turn them back off and dismantle them under President Trump, there's a setback. It is not so easy to get them going again. Research projects that people fund are 5-year projects, 10-year projects, 20-year projects, which is why we need to make a commitment to a really stable and consistent bipartisan funding mechanism for clean energy research going forward.
Extremely well said, Katie. And Justin also said nuclear fusion. So I just wanted to very briefly talk about nuclear energy because it's of great interest in my district is the San Onofre nuclear plant. And I actually have a report. I wasn't going to do this. It's sitting on my desk. We were talking about this at another meeting earlier today. Check this report out. You can see it on our official website, mikelevin.house.gov, or if you go to the Samuel Lawrence Foundation. We created a task force. My position is pretty simple. There's great promise with things like nuclear fusion. In fact, one of the privately funded fusion facilities, TriAlpha's in Orange County, where they've spent like $1 billion. It was the late Paul Allen that helped invest in that. But the fission plants that we have, like the legacy plants, San Onofre, Diablo, and the rest, I wouldn't build any more of those. You can debate whether we should keep the existing ones in other parts of the country running. We have to figure out the waste issue. And you've got the challenge here is about 45% of the nation's zero carbon emissions are coming from the current fleet of nuclear plants. So from that perspective, it's good. But from the waste perspective, we've got no strategy to deal with spent nuclear fuel. And what I've realized is that the challenge that we face right off our coast with 1,600 tons of waste is really just the symptom of a bigger challenge, which is the roughly 100,000 tons all across the country, 120 sites. Where we have nowhere to send it. And we put all of our eggs in the basket of Yucca Mountain in Nevada. We invested $16 billion and Then it was stopped in the late 2000s. And so I'm trying very hard to figure out the next steps. And just met yesterday with Chris Hansen, who's the latest NRC commissioner. The way the NRC is set up, Trump had to appoint a Democrat. And so he appointed Chris Hansen. Is actually a really good pick. So I am optimistic that we're going to find a solution to our spent nuclear fuel issue. And we've got to continue to be researching things like modular reactors and fusion, along with a variety of other clean energy technologies that I think, frankly, have to take precedence, like utility scale storage. But great question.
Mike, I just want to shout out again to everybody. If you're in the 45th Congressional District, you need to be paying attention to San Onofre. If there is a seismic incident, it's not just going to stop at Dana Point. It's going to affect our entire region. And Mike, I just want to say thank you for your work in trying to prioritize. You're absolutely right that we're not the only area who's dealing with this problem. Nobody would like to have nuclear waste stored near them. I think that's a pretty global unit. Talk about bipartisan agreement. There's bipartisan agreement that nobody wants nuclear waste next to them. That said, I think Mike has done a really great job of trying to say that, in areas where there's potential for seismic activity, in areas that are not themselves climate resistant, like a coastal area where there could be flooding, we need to prioritize those areas as we begin to think about those solutions. And Mike, I've read that report that you held up, and it is just terrific. So for those of you, and I hope people in the 49th district have read it, but I just want to say this is really a great example. And you can find it at Mike's website, which is levin.house.org. Did I get it right?
Mike Levin. There's another Levin, Andy.
There's two Levins.
So you're the only porter. If there was another porter, you'd have to have a crazy URL like me.
But it's extremely interesting, and the work that's being done by songs, by the decommissioning thing, touring San Onofre, and with an open mind, but questioning what you hear. These are all really important parts about locally understanding what energy sources are and what the challenges are that they present for us. But in terms of nuclear fusion, I think the core message, Mike, is right, which is we have to be investing in new technology, but we have to realize that there are trade-offs in any of these systems. And so we're making trade-offs, and the more that we can think climate first as we develop these technologies, the less likely we are to find ourselves where we do today with spent nuclear fuel.
Well, I thank you for being one of the original co-sponsors of that bill, the Spent Fuel Prioritization Act, which just very simply says of all the 120 or so sites, prioritize moving the waste from those with the highest seismic risk and highest population density. And I don't like being first on that list, but we are. We've got over 8 million people within 50 miles of the plant, including all the people in our districts, and also the active earthquake faults, the inactive earthquake faults. The seismologists at UCSD and Scripps are not very optimistic about this, but we've got to get that waste off the coast. Let's see if we can go to the next one. Gabby, also in La Jolla, asks, what are going to be the long-term effects of the climate crisis on the job market, and what types of careers are going to see growth or decline? Well, Gabby, one of the things that Joe Biden said lately that I absolutely loved is he said, when Trump thinks about climate change, the word that comes to his mind is hoax. And when we think about climate change, the word that comes to our mind is jobs. And so I would actually recommend everybody go to rewiringamerica.org. There is a report there, Mobilizing for a Zero Carbon America, that lays out the 25 million new jobs that we can create in the clean energy sector by 2035. And at a time when we have 28 million people collecting unemployment, we need a big jobs plan. And I think clean energy and infrastructure can be a huge part of that. I recently watched a documentary on recovering after the Great Depression. And there's no question we're at that crossroads again right now, where we have a massive economic challenge, regardless of what Trump says about the stock market. I think, it's been exposed that the stock market's performance is not indicative of how everyday Americans are experiencing their lives and the struggles that they're facing. We're going to need to create millions and millions of jobs. And I think we can meet that moment today, just as we did then, if we embrace the clean energy jobs of the future.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be honest that there are people whose jobs will be put at risk and perhaps even whose jobs will be lost as we make this transition. And we need to be straight with them about that and then have a strong plan for how we're going to be supporting this transition. And so, I think we can't pretend that magically this structural change in our economy from fossil fuel based to clean energy, it does carry with it the potential for some economic dislocation. But most importantly, it carries forward with it the potential for some economic improvements. So as we move this forward, we want to make sure that these clean energy jobs, those workers have the ability to unionize, to collectively bargain, that they have good, strong health and safety, OSHA protections at these sites. But anytime you talk about, you sort of use Elizabeth Warren's phrase, big structural change, there's the potential for that big structural change to be used by those in power to actually set back gains in other areas. So we want to make sure as we move toward green energy jobs in the future and things like wind service, people who service wind turbines, in urban farming, in hazardous waste cleanup, that we are making sure that we're protecting the right to organize and the right to form a labor union, and also that we're protecting and making sure that we have OSHA public safety regulations to make sure those jobs are as safe as they can possibly be. And so I think we have to recognize that it's going to take some vigilance there to do that. But it's really an opportunity for us to create the next generation of jobs. And Orange County and San Diego County are so well situated to grow these jobs. And for so long, our economy, a lot of it was about building homes. And those days of our economy are slowing down and coming to an end, even though I would add, one of the things I'm really passionate about is investing in housing and making sure that as we make that housing investment, returning to some of the things Mike talked about, we're investing in housing that is weatherized, that is climate resilient, that is zero emission to the maximum extent possible. But all of that will help us create new jobs. I think we have time, Mike, for one more question. So I was going to take a question from Anika, who is a student at the University of California, San Diego at UCSD. And this is, I think, a great question to end on. Anika asks, what can I, as an individual, do to make the Green New Deal politically viable? So first and foremost, I guess you can probably guess where I'm going to go with this. Vote. And make sure, please, that you vote all the way down the ballot. Because as we talked about, just like the U.S. can't solve climate by itself, the federal government can't do it if there's resistance at the county level or at the local level. So make sure you're registered to vote, have a plan for how you're going to be voting in the pandemic. And then I think talk about climate change. Talk about it with your family and your friends. Talk about it with your parents. Make sure that, if you're interested in this, that you're joining relevant organizations that are doing the work on this. And there's a huge number of those that you can take part in webinars and things like this. But really recognize that every single person on this planet bears some responsibility for where we find ourselves with climate change, and we all bear some responsibility in how we're going to address this problem. And so I'm really, really grateful that you want to be involved in this. And one of the things we have at my office is a youth advisory board, and this is a board that meets once a month. It's a 6-month program, and one of the things they do is study legislation and make recommendations to me. And no surprise, some of the bills that they're most enthusiastic about and that were bills that related to climate and to protecting our planet. So I'll invite Mike to answer this one as well, but I just can't say enough how important it is for each of us to think of ourselves. Part of our identity needs to be not just as moms or dads, not just as Democrats or Republicans, but as people who are warriors in fighting climate change.
Extremely well said, Katie. And, I also would just encourage you to vote. Look, we have to vote early. Right now, we're seeing an unprecedented potential sabotage of the United States Postal Service. We could have an entire town hall about that, and I suspect we probably both will be in the next 80 days. But October 20th is my birthday. It's also Kamala Harris's birthday, which is pretty cool. But all I want for my birthday is for everybody to vote on or around my birthday. If we all vote by October 20th, and particularly in Orange County, it's so easy. You can go to one of the vote centers, you can go to one of the drop-offs, and San Diego County doesn't have those quite the same. We're trying to figure out where all the drop-off locations will be. A lot of the libraries are closed because of COVID and so forth. But the good news is that we've got, I think, registrars who actually care about everybody who's eligible to vote actually getting their ballot in and doing so safely, not risking people's public health. I worry a lot about some of the other states. In terms of your specific question, another thing you can do is refute some of the ridiculous misinformation out there. We don't want to ban hamburgers. We don't want to ban airplanes. I mean, heck, we're on airplanes far too much, and I probably eat far too many hamburgers. But look, at the end of the day, what we do want is a dramatic transition to accelerate the deployment of clean energy and to have a sustainable future. And that means for those of us that are fortunate to live in a place like Southern California, clean air, clean water, a cleaner beach, a cleaner environment, first and foremost. It also means that in addition to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, that we're also having those ancillary benefits of reducing criteria pollutant emissions, trying to reduce things like lung cancer and asthma. So get NOx and SOx and particulate matter down. That's another benefit of doing things like electric vehicles and having more efficient buildings and other efficient practices. So I would just personalize it. Talk about what it means to you and tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, your classmates, but just remain civically engaged above all else, and your passion will take you very far. I cannot tell you how grateful I am to have gotten to do this with my friend Katie Porter. We wanted to do this for a while. This has been terrific. We're going to have to do this again in person, and hopefully sooner rather than later. But I just can't thank you enough for all that you're doing, Katie.
No, thank you so much, Mike, for partnering on this and for helping to organize it. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in, whether you're across the country, whether you're in the 45th or the 49th, participating in this town hall is part of how we're going to make change and make political change and protect our planet. So thank you, Mike, for all of your work on the select committee, on the climate crisis, and just for being a terrific partner in Congress going forward. And, I think Mike and I both do far, far too many of these Zooms, and it's so nice to be able to talk to someone else and not talk into a blank screen. So I think we've got a good thing going here, Mike, and I hope we can reconvene to talk about other pressing issues between now and Election Day. But everybody get out there and vote by mail. When I say get out there, I mean get out your stamp and vote, but stay safe during this time and know that both Mike's office and my office are here to help you. This is a really, really challenging time. And I think in the middle of a pandemic, to be also talking about some of the other big challenges that we're facing, like the climate crisis, can feel daunting. But I'm leaving this town hall feeling very, very energized, that I've learned a lot and that we have great partners on the ground in our constituents who are going to help protect our planet going forward.
Thank you so much, Katie. Really grateful to be with you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We appreciate you. Take care, everyone.